Hey everyone, welcome to Manufacturing Hub. This is episode 266. Dave and I have taken a couple of weeks off after Automate, so we're very excited to be back talking about Automate, talking about our impressions of the general industry, talking about some of the technical and different technologies that we believe are advancing in our space, but also talking about some of our plans, talking about some of the upcoming trade shows, what we will be doing at them, sharing with you some ideas, but also giving you the opportunity to maybe ask questions, to comment as to what you are planning to do and see at those events. So, without any further delay, Dave, Automate a couple of weeks ago. I want to dive into the first impressions, right? Going into the Automate trade show, just some immediate maybe takeaways for you when it comes to Automate.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to talk about Automate. It was a fantastic time. Kind of initial impressions, as longtime listeners of the show have heard me say over and over again. I love going to these shows in order to meet people, in order to have conversations, in order to go to those fun networking events and be able to really kind of have those conversations in person, and be able to go get more thoughts and opinions than is Dave, Vlad, and typically one guest on the other side of this. So it's absolutely awesome to be able to go ahead and see everyone. First thought is thanks to everyone for coming out. And many times I was like two people deep. And so some folks were waiting to see me. I'm sure, Vlad, there were some folks that came over that had to go wait and see you. So thank you guys for going to do that. Absolutely top highlight of my Automate 2026 experience. Beyond that, absolute shout out to A3 for putting on such an amazing event. I don't know about you, Vlad. I felt like we were in Detroit last year. There were 40,000 people. I said something to the effect of, I don't know how we could possibly grow that much larger. I can't imagine that we've outgrown the Detroit Convention Center. And then we showed up to the McCormick Center again, and we were more than just that first North Hall. We were the North and the South side, and the South side was absolutely growing. And they said there were 40,000 people there last year. They were hoping for 50,000 people there this year. It felt like it was busy from 20 or 30 minutes in to Tuesday morning when the show floor opened, all the way through Wednesday night Wednesday night was my last night there. It felt very busy, even fairly far back. So absolutely shout out to A3 for putting on such an amazing show. I am surprised and thrilled that the show continues to grow as much as it does. I am excited to see the booths getting bigger. I'm excited to see the ecosystems getting bigger. I'm excited to see people bring out more toys and devote more time into growing Automate, which continues to become, as I've said for several years, probably the largest and most important large automation show in North America. So I'm thrilled to see that. And I am thrilled I'm not super excited to go do another show in Las Vegas, but I'm excited to see what Automate does when we head to Las Vegas next year. And then last shout out to Jake Hall and Chris Lukey for throwing another ripping extra innings. I said last year, kind of similar to Automate, is I don't know how we could fit more people in. I don't know how this could possibly be any louder. I feel like, we sold out tickets 2 weeks ahead of time. And there were a few hundred tickets that got delivered during the week of Automate. Absolutely fantastic conversation. If you were one of the 1,500 or so of us who managed to make it to the extra innings, we were all very blessed to have such an awesome event. I'm not sure I have ever lost the ability to hear quite so quickly at a networking event as I did there. So big thanks to all of those folks for putting on such an amazing Automate conversation.
Yeah, and look, my general first impressions of the show very similar, right? If I were to use a single word to describe the experience, I would say overwhelming, right? There
Mhm.
was a lot of things to see, and even I label myself as an expert in certain domains, and I would say a generalist in many others. There was
Mhm.
just so much to cover and see on topics that I again only began to scratch the surface on, right? In our space and manufacturing and industrial automation, there was a lot of different robotics applications. There were a lot of companies, obviously on the larger side, I think it goes without saying, but a lot of different startups attempting to do things with AI on across different layers of the stack. So I think it was interesting from a technological standpoint to see where the industry is going, to see where the money is being invested. I think that the conversations, at least for me, have shifted from last year, not only because of
Mhm.
the AI side, but also because again, I had the opportunity to be in a booth as opposed to just an attendee. So I think I got a lot more exposure to seeing what the attendees were asking for, as opposed to having the conversation with the exhibitors. So for me, that was a very, I would say, different but also interesting perspective to have during the week at Automate. But again, yes, as you mentioned, a lot of very interesting events. I've seen photos of other events as well. I know there's always, or I guess, multiple things going on all at once in the evenings for Automate, depending on which groups you're going to. So there were quite a few successful, again, based on the photos that I've seen, other events going on every single night of the trade show. So again, very difficult to split yourself and attend all of them at once. But you and I have certainly had some very interesting ones during the week. Um,
Absolutely. I would say, Vlad, but before we get into a bunch of Automate specifics, I do
yep.
want to let the folks know because we've got a ton of stuff coming up on the Manufacturing Hub side in the next couple of weeks, in the
Yep.
next 3 months. And I want to go ahead and call that out for our listeners, especially if you're new here to the show. Most of the time, 80 to 90% of the time, Vlad and I have a guest on, and we've got a couple of awesome guests coming on in the next couple of weeks. We've got some videos that are going to come out from Automate. But coming up next week, we've got Ujwal Kumar. He's the president of Siemens Digital Industry Americas. We're continuing the conversation that we started at Automate. He brought up this really interesting topic of deglobalization. Typically, I've heard it more talked about as like regionalization or hyper like localization of going from a global supply chain down to a more country or regional or hyper regional. We started that conversation at Automate. We'll have a video of that that's coming out soon, but we're going to bring him on and we're going to have an entire 75-ish minutes of conversation talking about that, diving into his background, probably asking questions like, within your role of president of Siemens DI Americas, both North and South America, what does that look like? Right before he joined Vlad and I at Automate, he was testifying in front of Congress in Washington, D.C. The day before. So he's got a very different perspective than most of the perspectives that we normally talk about. And so I'm very excited about that. So you guys mark your calendar for the 22nd for that. We'll go ahead and drop links. That event is up. The
Yep.
following week, we've got Martin talking about Siemens Accelerator. So they have a product. They have a product or a solution for the SMB, for the small and medium-sized manufacturing businesses that I've been having conversations with them over the last year or so, right before it officially launched. But the idea is, here is a package of software solutions that you can go buy for, I believe it's sub $10,000. And then you can go ahead and deploy these across all of these various different areas. I love the concept. I'm excited to talk to Martin and his team as to what that looks like, how it's being rolled out, what the hardware solutions look like, and really dive into that. It seems like a very interesting price point that could potentially help a bunch of people and is certainly worth going ahead and diving into. And I'm very excited for that.
Yep.
Jumping ahead a little bit, we're now in
Maybe I
September.
can jump in for ICC as well a little bit, Dave.
Okay,
So
go for
we
it, Vlad.
also have ICC coming up in September. I will pull up the exact dates in just a moment.
The
But
22nd
Dave
through
and I,
24th.
there we go, 22nd to 24th. Thank you, Dave. And ICC, for those of you who are unfamiliar, is the Inductive Automations Ignition Community Conference, which takes place in Sacramento, California, going forward every year, right? So last year was the first time that it took place in Sacramento. And Dave and I have been at the conference for the last. This is going to be the fourth iteration, if I'm not mistaken. Is it the third iteration or the fourth iteration?
I
Anyhow,
think this is the third year for us as Manufacturing Hub.
third year for us as manufacturing hub, but we have a lot of things planned as we normally do. We are very ambitious with our schedules, despite always discussing that we will be scaling down some of those initiatives. But before we get into what we're doing, ICC, right? So both you and
Mhm,
I spent quite a bit of time in the Ignition ecosystem. And
mhm,
once again, Ignition, for those who are unfamiliar, is a SCADA, MES, and other acronyms, I would say, at that level player, which provides a software solution for manufacturers. And there's, of course, many other solutions within the ecosystem that can augment or supplement to what Ignition provides. But the ICC specifically is an event where a lot of practitioners, a lot of manufacturers, but also a lot of folks from inductive automation come together to explore some of those solutions, explore the opportunities. There's going to be training sessions. There's going to be
mhm.
the hackathon, correct? Buildathon?
The
Buildathon?
build-a-thon, yes.
The buildathon. There's going to be a couple of things, and we can unpack this probably as we get closer
Yeah.
to ICC. But long story short, there's going to be a lot of different events for those of you who are in the industry, right? Who are looking to learn not only at that layer. There's going to be also presenters that present with hardware solutions at the PLC, HMI, network layers, right? So there's a lot of different topics to explore. Definitely check it out. As far as Dave and I are concerned, we will be having a lot of manufacturing hub conversations. If you are interested in speaking with us, I will throw this out to the audience, and you will be at ICC. Please send myself or Dave a note. Happy to see if there is a time slot that we can figure out together. But we will be scheduling the regular conversations with quite a few of our connections at ICC. Outside of that, Dave, I know that you already have a finalized engagement. I think they've released the
Mhm.
speakers, right, for ICC, if I'm not mistaken, on the
Yeah,
website.
I have a presentation on Thursday afternoon. On Thursday afternoon, and it's entitled From System Anarchy to Solution Governance. I've got one of my end user clients who's going to be up there on stage with me, and we're going to go talk about a project that we've done in order to go take a system that was 4 or 5 or 6 different groups who had been working on it deep, having system issues, and then the processes that we went through in order to make that system able to run how kind of anyone hopes it run. And that very much so in the sense of no one knows that Ignition is running the system and the solution. We did a bunch of moving and shifting from cloud on-prem. We added a bunch of servers. We moved a bunch of things, reduced tags significantly. And so we get to go talk about it. And I am super excited that we get to go talk about it. It is not often that we get to go do these things, and I am happy to go ahead and talk about it. Jose and I are going to do some presentations in regards to that, and we're going to do our very best to answer as many questions as we possibly can without getting in trouble from our end user, from my client and from Jose's employer, based upon what we're talking about. And so we're going to go through, we're going to
Awesome.
talk about that, and our goal is very much along the lines of, if when you leave, if you're having similar issues, hopefully you can take these similar tactical steps in order to start down the process that we were able to go down.
Awesome. And on my side, I'm still ironing out some details. I will be most likely demoing a similar type of solution that I've done at Automate. It is
Mhm.
still a little bit TBD. I know that the format of Automate as well as ICC is a little bit different, and the contingencies for the vendors are slightly different. So I will
Mhm.
not be announcing that partnership and demo just yet, but there are conversations happening. So there will be updates shared on my side as we get closer to the event.
That's awesome. And then I would say other thing, if you guys have listened for a while, you've heard me talk about it. Somewhere in August, we're hoping to have Elephant, which is our Ignition logs and diagnostic bundle AI contextualization tool, up and running so that we can showcase it to you guys on the channel, and tell you where we think it's going to fit within the Ignition ecosystem. I will say we've got the MVP up and running. It's just not able to go ahead and give people logins to go ahead and run it. So if you are Ignition users, and you're running 8.1 or 8.3 and are running into or experiencing some problems, please feel free to reach out to me. I am happy to go ahead and show you what we've built and see what we can do in order to help you with that.
Can you give us a bit more details? Are you ingesting the logs, parsing them, and then giving some recommendations for the system, or what's the general vision?
Absolutely. So Elephant actually started from the engagement that we're presenting about on ICC, right? So if you guys have worked on enterprise ignition, or even single gateway ignition, typically we all know within the Ignition ecosystem that the logs, assuming that we are logging, should be able to go ahead and answer the problem. Should be able to go ahead and identify and answer, these are the issues that we're having. So with the client that we're presenting with, one of our developers, Alexis, I guess we were doing a bunch of scripting in order to go through and pull different pieces of information. And so Alexis wrote a fairly giant script in order to go ahead and parse through a bunch of logs from half a dozen or 10 gateways that we had up and running in order to go ahead and take a look at that. And after we ran the fan on his MacBook for 22 hours on the 16 gigs of RAM that he had on the MacBook at that point, several times, we came out with some really good information. We were looking at, we were looking at the information and we were comparing the number of warn, error, and info items that had come out. And we, based upon doing those comparisons, we were able to go ahead and put all of that together. And then we were leveraging some AI to do a bit of contextualization and to take some internal knowledge databases and repositories to say, hey, let's go ahead and look at these items to begin with. We had some good initial success on that project. And then we've changed it from running a whole several thousand lines of Python script into a product that we now call Elephant, and we're doing a whole bunch of pre-processing internally on our side in one of our cloud tenants, and then from that point we're running it through a model or several models where we are still doing some internal testing, and I feel like that's one of those that will continue to be tested into various projects to do some contextualization. And so we're pulling out an executive report. We're pulling out, these are the top errors. We're pulling out, these are the items to go ahead and specifically look at, and we're doing some categorization of those items. We've had some fairly good success running one or two gateways and saying, hey, go ahead and take a look at these problems, allowing our MVP users to go ahead and fix some of those items, coming back a couple of weeks later. And then once we've reduced a significant amount of noise in the system, we're able to go ahead and see deeper into the system because we don't have PLCs that are down and throwing errors, because we don't have 24 printers that are on the network adding a bunch of noise. And we're able to go find some particularly interesting results. Specifically, we've had a couple of issues with our clients that they were having intermittent disconnects, on the software side, similar to if you're trying to go find an intermittent short to ground on the electrical side, is exceptionally difficult to go ahead and figure out what is going on. And we're able to go ahead and pinpoint that because a guy named Dave or a guy named Vlad isn't deeply looking in to go figure out what's happening to lose connection for 15 milliseconds every 1 to 2 hours. So we found some good results on that.
Mm-hmm.
But what we found as we've expanded it out into like an ISA 95 structure that would allow us to get 10 plus gateways deep at this point is that the real value for many of these enterprise users is going and looking at half a dozen gateways and being able to go ahead and compare gateway to gateway, facility to facility, and go ahead and take a look at that in an enterprise structure. And then once we've run all of those, we can go find additional comparisons through a bunch of deep analysis that we have put together. And that has found some pretty interesting results that we are excited about and what we've found so far.
Interesting. Yeah, I know that log parsing is not a problem unique to manufacturing, right?
Mhm. Yep.
Any like software system that is, I would say, predominantly like cloud based, at least in the
Yep.
software and SaaS industry, it is a very heavy uplifting to have engineering resources, usually
Yes.
on the DevOps side, that will go and sift through logs,
Yep.
and it's very, very challenging. I've not seen AI solutions that can parse through it yet, or at least I know that it's being tested out, right? I've
Yep.
not seen the results and benchmarks, but I could see how it can be
Yeah.
applied to our industry and make it a lot more streamlined, I would say, especially because a lot of the plants run very lean on that side, right? If you
Yep.
deploy Ignition, the
Hmm.
reality is the customer does not have a DevOps team. They'll probably have
No,
someone on the
absolutely.
IT side, but they don't understand the nuances of networks and the nuances
Hmm.
of connections, and there's just not enough people looking at those things. So should be interesting. I'm
Absolutely.
curious to
Yeah.
hear the
I
topic.
guess I should be clear. The AI is very much on the contextualization side, right? So
Mhm.
we do a lot of the lifting, nearly 100% of the lifting we're doing up front through through our front end systems, if
Mhm.
you will, and then we're taking that information and then we're running it through our models in order to help contextualize and help present that, as
Gotcha.
opposed to we're just feeding it into ChatGPT or Cloud Code. I know
Okay.
people who have tried that. Yeah, I know people who have tried that on logs on various things. That is not what we are doing. Yeah,
Mm.
that is not what we're doing. And we also have kind of the internal knowledge base and repositories of what we've created over the last 10 plus years of ignition development in order to go ahead and increase the knowledge. Yeah, in order to go ahead and increase the knowledge of some of these models. And so we're
Sweet.
very excited with what we've found. Sometimes I guess I originally had started talking about how it was specifically an AI log contextualization tool, and what I found is that some people get excited and some people get very particularly worried. And so I find that it's important to clarify that we're doing nearly all of the heavy lifting up front. And then from all of that heavy lifting, we're running it through some of our models to do some of that contextualization, in order to go help make it presentable, in order to go help answer some questions. And we are looking, so when we launch, it will be all cloud based. We are looking at some on-prem solutions, and that is, we, to the surprise of no one in manufacturing, is certainly something that people have almost immediately, almost everyone asked about. Lots of people are interested about that. We have a path forward. We have a path forward. The big question is, what is it going to look like on the hardware side in order to allow us to go run those models? And then which of those models are we going to go run locally? And then how fast can you run those models locally? Because speed is of the essence. As I tell all of my data scientists and other folks on the Kaplan side, everyone on our in our life is would be generally happy if we could go ahead and spit it out in 2 to 3 minutes, and everyone would think, man, this is really fast. And they continue to look at me and say, Dave, this is very slow. We must go faster. So we will be going faster. Whether a guy named Dave thinks that we need to go faster or not, we will be going faster. That is what I can tell everyone.
Good. Speaking of ignition solutions and gateways, to bring us back a little bit to automate
Hmm.
and speak about the specifics of what we had accomplished there, right? Allow me to maybe start with some of my early impressions. I, again, for those that have not seen the videos that I've published on LinkedIn as well as YouTube, had
Hmm.
a full gateway running of an ignition instance, which was presenting basically a packaging line, right? A filler, a capper, a labeler, a case packer, as well as a palletizer. And my intent, right, going into Automate was to, of course, showcase the hardware, showcase the software, talk about the different solutions, but ultimately create an environment that I have seen many, many different times where the higher level or the overarching question becomes, where do we invest the capital for the most ROI, right? And this is a
Hmm.
very common problem for a variety of different industries. as you start having this linear flow of product, where is number one, where is our bottleneck? And this could be determined from the OEE. This could be determined from, again, there's some debates whether OEE is an important metric for our industry. I would argue that, again, you can pick whichever KPI you would like, but ultimately you do have bottlenecks on your production line, and they are very rarely obvious to the naked eye, right? Sometimes you can
Mhm.
obviously see product pile up before a specific machine, and you can generally tell where the problem lies. But in most cases, as you start seeing the complexity of machines starting, machines stopping, going through different states, right? And this is where we can talk about PAC-ML, which could be an entire episode and probably would require someone with that very deep knowledge to be explained. But ultimately, the intent of my demo was to showcase how you can start collecting data and then presenting the understanding to the end customer where the opportunity for the largest investment is. And of course, with the demo, you can basically play it out as an HMI, as a SCADA, as well as an MES system where you could control the line, you could adjust different parameters, you could also see historical information and different charts, but ultimately you're trying to look at MES type of information, you're looking at OE to try and figure out what do you need to adjust. And in the real world scenario, are we buying a second labeler that we're putting,
Yeah.
for example, in parallel, or are we adding a buffer to a specific machine because it needs to go down for a specific number of minutes and takes so long to repair? Or are we adding, a second palletizer because it's simply unable to be optimized for the product flow? And Dave, my surprise, and again, we've talked a little bit about
Yeah.
this during Automate, was the fact that, I was hoping to have a lot more data conversations
Hmm.
with the attendees in general. And I got quite a few, I would say, again, not necessarily basic questions, but I would say questions around instrumentation, questions around PLCs, questions about ignition in general. Many attendees did not know what ignition is. I
Okay.
had a ton of questions as to if ignition was deployed on my Allen Bradley Compact Logics PLC or it was in the IPC, which
Yeah.
components were in the IPC, what kind of protocols can be used to pull data from ignition, can it be used again as an HMI, can it be used as a SCADA, what does it take to develop? So I had to pull up
Mhm.
ignition designer and show people how I configured not only the screens, I had to go into the gateway configuration, explain to them how it was deployed. I had used a couple more tools which
Yeah.
added, I would say, a layer maybe to the complexity and understanding
Mhm.
of the demo in the field. But it is, again, in my opinion, representative of the actual environment, but also solves some of the problems. And so for me, overall, the conversations were very interesting. But as I mentioned a little bit earlier, it also opened my eyes as to what are the actual problems that some of the engineers and managers that came to automate were looking for, right? They were not necessarily looking at the higher level perhaps opportunities, at least in the conversations that I have had. They were looking to modernize their facility. A lot of them
Yeah.
expressed the concern with having PLC 5s. I had conversations around slicks, right, about
Mhm.
the migration plan of going to either a control logics rack or going to compact logics. A lot of them had very obsolete HMIs, right? So the question as to whether or not ignition can be used as an HMI and how it's actually done came from the fact that there's multiple engineers that came by and had a older, again, like plant and deployment of panel views, and of course they're
Yeah.
looking to scale, they're looking to purchase replacements which they cannot of the specific equipment type. So they asked me about the architecture and what it would look like to go into factory talk VSC or ignition, right? They're evaluating
Mhm.
the two options and alternatives.
Yep.
So I guess all I'm trying to say is the conversations that I thought would be a lot more data oriented, a lot more industry 4.0 oriented, were, I would say, heavily skewed towards modernization, towards control systems, towards SCADA, which was, like I said, eye opening, but also very interesting to see. And of course, very good conversations came from that. Dave, before I
Absolutely.
dive into my other things, yeah, what have you got
Yeah,
on the
no, no,
docket?
no. I was gonna say I like that. As the listeners will hear, I spent an amount of time in the Ignition ecosystem booth, having very similar conversations. The range of conversation is everyone from, "Hey, we are, VP of operations, and we're looking to go solve this at 20 sites," down to, "How do I ping a PLC?" That was the range of conversation I had over the course of about 3 hours, and it was a little wild. It was a little jarring, but I did want to ask you, Vlad, because you spent a bunch of time building this demo, and I know you wanted to have a bunch of conversations specifically around data, and I understand that you had more conversations about the generalness of system and plant upgrades and what is Ignition and how do I do this and how does it scale and all of those things. What are your takeaways like when it comes, I guess, like, let's start specifically with your demo, because I know you and I have had a bunch of hours of conversation not on Manufacturing Hub as to what people are looking for, etc. Do you feel like your demo connected? Were they interested in the screens? Were they interested in the data? Were they interested in the how, where it's running, to your point of the Tiguar IPC versus the control logics? What was kind of the main themes that you saw and like the feedback that you got from the folks who were standing there?
Yeah, I think generally speaking, the demo connected. I think that what I've learned is number one, maybe the physical layout of the hardware can tell a better story and is a little
Hmm.
bit more important than I anticipated, right? Like I said,
Yep.
make the assumption that everyone understands what an IPC is and how it's running software is perhaps not something that I will underestimate in the future. So I think just
Hmm.
laying out the physical hardware. Here's your like everyone understands a PLC, right? If you're in automation, at least you're coming from the OT side, you understand generally when you see a PLC what it is
Hmm.
actually doing in the field. So people understood that without any questions. The confusion came from, like I said, the IPC side and the software side. And rightfully so, right? Because again, I have experienced IT and I have experienced those environments. So I think that I'm a little bit more knowledgeable on that architecture, and
Yep.
I underestimated maybe the skills gap when it comes to
Hmm.
some of those tools and how things are deployed. So I would say that if I were to bring this demo again to ICC or some other trade shows, I will line it up a little bit better where everything builds on itself, but also there's a clearer story and path and explanation. And of course, I've shared the full videos on LinkedIn. I could not have anticipated everyone watching them right before they
Yeah.
came to automate. So it takes a while to unpack, I think, some of those nuances depending on your involvement in our space, probably your hierarchy in terms of the position, and ultimately which systems you touch. But I would say, generally speaking, it connected. People had good questions, and I was happy to clarify and explain any discrepancies. I don't think I've
Yes.
had people as I would say, like, with the gap as far as how do I ping a PLC, but I
Yep.
had some questions around like which protocols are used to pass the data from specifically the Rockwell PLC to the Tiguar IPC into Ignition, as opposed to some other control systems, right? Because people
Mhm.
came with questions not only on Rockwell but on Siemens. I had someone ask about Omron, Mitsubishi, and
Mhm.
some code assist based PLCs, right? And as you probably know as well, the gateway is going to treat them differently. There's different drivers, and there's also different consequences as a result of using those drivers as well.
Absolutely. No, I would agree. I certainly saw and heard different things, and I think you made a really good point that I just want to kind of double down on for the listeners in relation to the presentation, right? So I think that you had the PLC and there was a power supply on a DIN rail, and I don't remember if the Tiguar was also on the DIN rail or the Tiguar was like slightly behind, and I like how you were set up. You also had like a monitor on the top, and so it was a little it was a little strange. What I have found is most simple way that you can possibly go ahead and explain things is the best way. The first time I was at Hanover, I was with our friends at Litmus, right? And so they had a booth, and they were also in a bunch of other booths very similar to what we saw at Automate this year. But in the Google Cloud booth, at that point, Litmus Edge was white labeled for GCP. And I don't know if it still is, but they had a very simple, like they had 4 or 5 different kind of PLCs and controllers down at the bottom, and it kind of all got sucked up into an intermediate point, and then it all got sucked up into the Google Cloud, right? And so think of the bottom as like an umbrella, and it had lights. It was beautiful in the fact that it was so simple. And sometimes going and explaining it visually with that simplicity will go save you tens or hundreds of questions and answers of where does this live, etc., etc. But as you've also heard me say, Vlad, each and every single one of these times at shows like Automate, absolutely all learning experiences. And I look forward to seeing what this demo hopefully turns into at future shows, be it ICC or beyond.
Yeah, and look, obviously, I wrestle with some of those
Yeah.
ideas. I think there's always room for improvement, but at the end of the day, there's still a question as to what the ROI is
Yeah.
and the type of conversations you're looking to have, right? The reality is, I'm not GCP, right? As you can probably uh, tell, but ultimately, they're trying to sell solutions at a much higher level. So
Mhm.
obviously, their audience, I would assume, is probably IT folks trying to come into the OT space and deploy tools relatively easily. Whereas I think a less polished demo in some cases can also bring an audience that was curious, right? So I've had many comments with people that would go by and look at me in a suit and immediately assume that I'm just a higher level sales guy that is looking to sell them either hardware or software. But as we got further into the conversation, they understood that I actually had deep expertise of the OT and IT solutions, and they were extremely impressed not only by the demo, right, but also by my experience as a result of building the demo myself. This was not just a
Mhm.
paid, how would I say it, like nice setup that was very well polished by some third party. I had actually planned out and explained to them why every component was being utilized, talked about some of my previous projects and how I solved specific, challenges as a result of that demo. So again, maybe there's an opportunity to lay it out better. I'm sure that it will become, how would I say, more and more polished as the demo travels to these different trade shows. But we will see what makes sense and what doesn't. If there are, I would say I'm in conversation with a couple of different vendors, but if there are vendors that believe there might be a fit at ICC or otherwise, I'm looking at a couple of other events toward the end of the year. More than happy to have that conversation. I am looking to augment with a couple of different solutions, pulling into Ignition and then presenting that data not only for the specific example that I currently have, but also for other industries that are not currently represented in the demo. So should be very interesting for sure.
Absolutely. No, I think that sounds good. Let me give everyone maybe a slightly shorter recap of what I was up to at Automate so that we can go talk about some other fun things as well. So I spent about half of my time in the inductive automation ignition ecosystem booth with my clients and friends over at 4IR talking about Factory Stack. Very similar to Vlad, as you guys heard me say. I had questions as to, what is ignition? I had questions to, I've gone through this course. How do I go set it up at my facility? I had questions to, hey, we've got ignition at some number of plants and we are looking to go ahead and roll out to 10, 12, 20 facilities over the next X number of years. We think ignition is the solution, but how do we go through the process of scaling that versus how do we go potentially scale something else? So wide range of conversations, very impressed with the different folks that I got to talk to and that I saw kind of all across the board. Absolutely fun and fantastic booth. As everyone on the IA side has heard me say, really happy to see it grow from where it was last year to where it was this year and excited to go see it continue to grow the ecosystem into next year. So there was a really awesome Acme Dynamite ecosystem demo that if you guys came by the booth, you probably saw. If you didn't come by the booth, you haven't seen. It will be at ICC. There may or may not be a webinar that goes out where all of the ecosystem partners talk about it between now and ICC. It was super fun and fantastic. It was all hosted on Factory Stack and the cloud. And everyone was connected through the same Wi-Fi connection. Now, I don't know if anyone has gone and lived that conference Wi-Fi life, but we had 3.75 megabytes of Wi-Fi. That was the contractually agreed upon amount. Honestly, super impressed with MQTT and the lightweightness of MQTT and our ability to go ahead and populate so many screens and demos from that same account. There were a couple of times where we lost connections over the course of the 4 days, but honestly, super excited and impressed with how lightweight that was. Yeah, super impressed and excited with how lightweight that was. Beyond that, I moderated a panel, as I told the listeners a month-ish ago, software-defined automation and the factory of the future. Super fun panel. We had a couple of folks from Siemens on there. We had Dave Nichols on there on the Loop and SASE side, and I got to go ahead and moderate that. It was a lot of fun. It was the first time I had done one of those panels at Automate. It was standing room only. There were a lot of questions, as Vlad probably heard me say. We left like 8-ish minutes to go ask questions, and we ran out of time to be able to go ahead and answer those questions, which was all one could hope in order to go ahead and do so. Absolutely fantastic conversation. Looking forward to continuing that. I'm still trying to see if there's a video of that existed. I thought there was going to be one, and I didn't see anyone who was recording. So as I was getting up on stage, I realized that there may have been a catastrophic mistake by a guy named Dave of not going and recording that panel. Because again, the conversation overall was super good. It was really fun to be able to go ahead and get Adrian and Jan's kind of feelings and thoughts and perspectives, especially from Europe and Germany, and then how that compares to what we're seeing over here very much in North America. It was interesting. You could certainly tell, even in the conversation and the people who were asking questions, there were people who were, hey, we have all of our data. We're ready to go kind of yank PLCs and go the virtual PLC or the soft PLC route, or it doesn't really matter what our controllers are, all the way to a gentleman who's got a whole bunch of disparate machines and data silos and old PLCs, whose like main thing of the entire conference was, how do I go ahead and collect this data, and how do I modernize, and how do I go make those decisions? And so again, really fun time. I was happy I got to go ahead and do that. A couple of other notes that I had. So I was super impressed with the Siemens truck. Vlad, did you go through the truck that was within the booth itself?
Yeah.
Okay. So I was super impressed with it. Vlad and I had heard that it was coming. As I told Vlad and everyone, foolishly thought they meant that it was going to be parked outside, not that they're going to put this 50-foot long tractor trailer inside the booth. I thought it went really well. They covered a lot of ground in 15 minutes or thereabouts that you were in there. They explained a lot of the Siemens ecosystem. They had a robot, they had some controllers, they had a bunch of other fun things. They went from, in theory, zero through bioreactors, through, in theory, AI and some other like industrial co-pilots in eigen engineering. They didn't get super technical and deep. But what I will say is I don't think it was necessarily meant for someone who's going to go sit there and argue about bioreactors for 45 minutes and how well it was or was not highlighted. What I do think it did a really good job with, there were a couple of like late teenagers or maybe college age folks who were there, and they had that kind of like aha moment. And I thought it did really well for that. My understanding is that they built it originally for CES in January. And so like that target folks who don't live all day, every day within the software or biopharma reactor space, absolutely 100% fantastic for that. And so I'd like to commend them for going and putting that together. I thought that was really good. And then one other topic to talk about is there were like lots of product releases. And I kind of boiled this down to like 3 or 3.5 categories of product releases that I saw, right? So And it's not going to surprise very many people, right? So we saw a lot of people talking about data. We saw a lot of people talking about cloud, and then we saw a lot of people talking about AI, and then like as a subtopic to that, physical AI was certainly something that got talked about a lot. I don't know if you had very many conversations re physical AI, Vlad. And then there was a debate, which may or may not have been friendly or not, as to what physical AI is, but I bring up AI because the number one thing in the conversation that I was having with folks, both as part of the booth and on like the executives that I was talking to, is very much we've shifted from people are buying AI to buy AI because it's cool to people are looking for AI because it solves a particular solution. And I need you to tell me how this solves my solution. And I need you to tell me how it solves the solution in a faster, less expensive way than if I were to do it 18 or 24 months ago. I think we've talked about this at least briefly on Manufacturing Hub prior to Automate, Vlad, but I think we are going to go continue to see that. I do have one more shout out. So Vlad and I got to go to the Horner Automation booth, and we've got some videos coming out from those guys, from Chuck as well, which was really cool. I feel like specifically Chuck managed to encompass, and Horner Automation managed to encompass this in their new offering, which is their OSC 360. So basically, if you have a fairly modern Horner Automation controller, one of their OSC modern, like plus or minus 5-year controllers, you can go ahead and take that data and publish it to the OSC 360 cloud. And I think it's 2,500 data points per minute to the OSC cloud is $250 for the entire year. And the reason I remember that is, do you not remember that we like made Chuck go ahead and repeat that particular part? Like he said, it's $250.
I know the price, but I don't know if that's points per year or connected data points at any like given time.
I think
But
it's
we can.
points that are transmitted over the course of a minute. It
Huh.
was a lot. It was a fairly
Yeah.
large amount, right? It was especially, yeah, it was a fairly large amount. I was impressed with it, and I feel like that goes and showcases. And if I am wrong, listeners in chat, we'll go ahead and make a note in there. If I am misremembering the conversation that we had, it was a large number of data points over a period of time for not very much money. And the reason I bring it up
Yeah.
is because I feel like it very much highlights the fact that everyone now knows that we need to go bring data to the cloud so that we can go extrapolate off of this data, because we are becoming more and more data driven on the manufacturing side. And so we'll have a video coming out about that. I think we've got 3 or 4 videos with Chuck, and we've got several videos that will continue to come out over the course of the next couple of weeks, month, thereabouts, across the Manufacturing Hub channels, talking about all of that. And I guess I really like that solution, and I think it very much highlighted the trend of what we're seeing and what we continue to see. And obviously there is demand from that. If you go from the Horner Automation controller directly to the cloud, or you go to the Horner Automation controller into local ignition, into some sort of cloud ignition solution, into some sort of AI, be it within ignition or within any of your marketplaces, or basically anything in between, everyone knows that data is king.
Yeah, I definitely would agree. I have a couple of thoughts, right? Obviously, not just specifically to automate, but as we maybe transition into the discussion of, I would say, different technologies across the industrial automation stack, but obviously relating to some of the comments that you have made with the context of automate. Starting with the data component, right? I think that there is a now a better understanding than ever that data is important, and that connectivity in general, right? Like I use connectivity as mainly on the network side of the OT environments, is usually beneficial. What I found, I
Mhm.
would say, a bit not necessarily bizarre. I think bizarre is a strong word, but I think the fact that we've been advocating for Industry 4.0 is has always almost became a disservice, right? Because there was a lot of confusion as to what the definition of Industry 4.0 is, despite
Hmm.
everyone agreeing that data is important. So I've how would I say it? I guess I've started to change some of the vocabulary and some of the nomenclature that I use in conversations to be a little bit more intentional and to be a little bit more precise. And that goes for the vendors as well as for the end users and, of course, distributors and integrators. But ultimately, I would agree that there is a higher appetite for data and connectivity based on what we've seen at Automate. AI, of course, is always top of mind, I think, at every
Hmm.
single conference. But for me, the opinion is the there is a distinct change. And I think you've mentioned this a little bit when you said that we're no longer looking for generalized AI. We're trying to figure out the fit for specific solutions.
Hmm.
I've been advocating for this for, I would say, almost 2 years, ever since AI was or I guess ever since LLMs were
Hmm.
popularized. I've never had a conversation with teams that were asking for generalized AI applications where they were in the end successful, but just purely investing in quote unquote AI. I think, and I've always mentioned this, at some point, someone would always ask the question, how much do we need to invest and what is the ROI on that specific investment based on what you will be able to implement? So I think that it's just becoming almost reality that originally maybe people were in certain cases throwing money at being AI enabled. But I think that as they saw the price sticker of some of those initiatives, they've realized that they need to be a little bit more specific and thus more critical of the proposed solutions brought to them for some of these initiatives. So yes, like I would say that at least when it comes to automate, there's been maybe a tone down of we generally are AI enabled to here's how we're using AI, here's how it's able to solve some of your problems. And even, at the Tigor booth, there was a demo made by Concept Reply
Hmm.
Concept. Um, and they were showcasing how AI running on a local machine can aid in being able to prompt basically for a specific application with a robot that would then execute said queries using LLMs. Whether or not it's
Okay.
useful or better, of course, remains to be seen. But it is possible now to implement something of this nature. And if you are probably a low volume, high, I would say, what's the word that I'm looking for? If there's always a change between the parts that you're
High
manufacturing, you
mix.
could be exactly low volume, high mix type of a manufacturer. I think
Hmm.
these applications specifically may make sense for you. But again, you and I, Dave, have had conversations
Hmm.
around using GPUs to identify
Yep.
different objects or pick and place, right? And again, I'm using that as a tangential maybe example of AI, but more specifically physical AI for different mixed packaging applications, which can become interesting
Hmm.
for a very specific subset of manufacturers. And
Yep.
again, you may know this, but in the past, I had to work with Delta robots on very specific bin picking applications for PNG for mix packs, right? And it
Hmm.
was very, very difficult and challenging to do so because you had to analyze each part and identify it using the traditional ways. So perhaps AI can come in and simplify some of those rollouts and packaging cells in those use cases. Now, going back to
Absolutely.
industry trends. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I guess to make a point in regards to the AI, I would agree. I think that very few people, even a year or two ago, were well. I mean, outside of the big groups that have huge R&D budgets, I think very few people were saying, "Yes, let me spend $500 million or $50,000 to go start this AI solution." In the conversations I was having, lots of people were looking into AI or were looking to invest that money or were investing money based upon the concept and the hype of AI. And someone saw, again, as I like to say, a not insignificant number of conversations I had over the course of a couple of years were some executive saw AI on the national news, and then they're like, hey, we need to have AI here. And then someone from within the organization was tasked with going and finding and figuring out what AI actually looks like for said organization. Most of the time, way too early, and having not laid any of the foundational pieces of really even industry 3, much less industry 4, and had no data collection and would have to start a, long, painful, expensive process to collect the data to be able to get to the point of now we can figure out what it's saying so that we can use it for AI.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the reality is, and maybe the realizations were that in order to leverage AI, you need to invest quite a bit in the infrastructure, into the networks, into some of the obsolete equipment. But ultimately, you need to be able to pull data out that provides the context of AI, and it is easier said than done, right?
Yeah,
That's the general realization, I think, for many manufacturers, and it's not just a question of technology, it's a question of labor, it's a question
yeah,
of data science. There's a lot of variables that goes into it, but it is not as cheap as originally I think everyone had anticipated. Going into
absolutely.
industry trends specifically, right? And you've mentioned this a little bit when we were talking about the different showcases at Automate. I wanted to maybe frame this as part of the ISA stack and sort of like moving us from bottom to the top. And you've mentioned the presence of virtual PLCs, right? And so for me, the PLC market has been very interesting, but in our space, I'm seeing to an extent as an influencer in that PLC and HMI per se segment because of my presence and my tutorials from Solus
Mhm.
PLC. So I've certainly had many conversations around virtual PLCs, about AI programming PLCs, about AI validating or helping validate the software
Mhm.
for PLCs. So if we start maybe with PLCs and HMIs in general, um, my general takeaways, right? So there's
Mhm.
more and more vendors releasing virtual PLCs, and for me, again, the this is not a huge innovation. You're obviously a PLC, if you boil it down, if you actually open the hardware. In the past, it used to be a microcontroller. Now it is more of a microprocessor type of an environment. So it is running software that has been compiled on that microprocessor, which has now been basically Dockerized, right? So we have created a container that you can drop on an IPC or on a server that will run in a quote unquote virtual environment. Now, at the end of the day, for me, I don't know, Dave, if you had similar thoughts or comments, but it all boils down to how robust is the control system when it comes to executing control specific tasks, right? So whether I'm the end user who's putting in the traditional PLC or if I'm putting in a virtual PLC on an IPC on a server, my biggest concern is this virtual PLC going to run 24/7, 365 without any issues, without causing any additional or excessive downtime as
Mhm.
benchmarked to the traditional PLC. And I would say with the IT tools, it is definitely possible to do so. I don't think you gain that much. Maybe you save a little bit of capital on the hardware, but I would assume this is not some kind of a big revolution. Instead of running in the PLC box, you're now just running in an IPC or a server box. I was curious maybe what your thoughts are when it comes to virtual PLCs.
Yeah, so I think the groups that are moving towards virtual PLCs. So as Siemens was launching their S7 1500 VPLC
Mhm.
2 years, 2.5 years ago, there was a case study with Audi that came out about how Audi was going and transitioning away from hardware PLCs into VPLCs. And
Sure.
I think a large part of that is because they are a large IT organization. They
Hmm.
already own lots of servers. They can go run those servers in high availability, and they're already networked to be able to experience very little additional downtime or anything else from there. I would say that the majority of organizations are probably not to the point of going and running things as a virtual PLC. I mean, historically, we've had lots of soft PLCs. A soft PLC being a PC PLC, or a PC running PLC software and simulation. So the VPLC is a movement in that direction. I think it's really a movement for IT focused organizations who have lots of servers and can go ahead and easily provision those servers in high availability architecture in order to go through the process of delivering those solutions to the plant floor without having to buy other pieces of hardware, that being physical PLCs. And because they can provision it in a particular way, they can provision it in the way that they know, and they don't have to go at other human bodies. They don't have to go figure out other additional complications, again, for very specific and particular organizations. I don't see a ton of groups going in that direction. Now, where I think, and as I think I said this 2 or 3 years ago, where I think it could be interesting is you're a guy named Vlad. You don't, you're traveling, you don't have a PLC with you. Or you're a guy named Vlad and you've got 15 different people who are working for you. And instead of sending out 15 different PLCs, you go give them VPLC licenses, or you go spin up a server internally at your headquarters and you've got several VPLC licenses, and you can go ahead and trade that around without having to go buy the physical hardware if you don't have the hardware and running on a server that you've already provisioned or were already going to provision. So I think that there are tangible benefits for lots of testing and other things. I think as we see people go in and look to deploy that to something like a much broader organization, it's a huge organizational change. Yeah, it's a huge organizational change of how do we go deploy this to a much broader organization. And it takes a very advanced organization that understands all of the IT ramifications in order to even attempt to go down that path. I suppose there's also we've got a massive supply chain crunch. I can go buy servers. I can't go buy PLCs. I need to go spin this up as a PLC in order to get back up and running.
Yeah, like I said, I think that the idea is there for very specific and niche use cases.
Mhm.
I just don't see it being as widespread as some may suggest, right? It is more of my comment. And I think it takes more of an undertaking to transition into that where it makes sense than groups originally anticipate. But again, I think it's definitely feasible. I think that it is something that groups can and should consider if they have a more IT leaning organization, which is not unheard of as well, right? And I'm not going to mention any names, but I've talked to customers that basically gave up on trying to find OT knowledgeable engineers and instead hired software based engineers and managers and then trained them up on the OT side. So naturally, if they need to deploy a virtual PLC that is then connected to the field devices, for them it seems to be a more natural route. They're more familiar
Mhm.
with containerization. They understand the applications that will manage some of that infrastructure. So yes, it will make sense. I guess my comment again goes back to, I think this is another layer of complexity that we will also need to manage in our industry, and how beneficial it's going to be remains to be seen. But I think we've gotten quite a few announcements. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, at Automate, Phoenix Contact has also made the announcement that they have to release their own flavor of the PLC, or that the fact that the PLC Next can be deployed on an IPC. So there's been
Okay.
quite a few announcements of virtual PLCs. Transitioning into, and again, I think we have a lot of different topics and angles to explore. I do want to go a little bit quicker through them. If the audience has any questions, right, whether or not it is live or when the recording is posted, don't hesitate to reach out. Happy to have these conversations. I've had many conversations around several companies taking a stab at deploying code, or I guess programming PLCs using AI. And when I say programming, I use that a little bit loosely because some of it is analyzing code that has already been written. Some of it is translating, code from, let's say, ladder logic into structured text or vice versa. Some
Mhm.
of it is helping with some pre-engineering work for PLCs. So taking a functional spec and laying out the skeleton of the program. I also have mixed feelings on that side, Dave, to be completely honest with you. I've looked at these solutions. So, taking a step back, right? So, maybe 7 or now probably 10 years ago, there was a
Mhm.
company called Wonder Logics. I don't know if you've ever talked to
Yeah.
them. It was by I think one of the founders was Amir Kaufman or something like that. Amir was his first name. I really believed in that solution, right? Because Wonder Logics was a visual or a graphical way to take a functional spec of a system that would then generate the entire code needed to run that specific environment, right? So
Mhm.
picture again, this is pre AI, and all you needed to do was to lay out different tanks, lay out flow meters, lay out a bit of instrumentation, and based on a graphical layout, it would create the full ladder logic diagram for that specific equipment. Well, the
Yeah.
challenge was that that approach did not scale, right? It was
Mhm.
great for simple applications. We're talking about a skid with maybe two pumps, a couple of tanks, maybe like one or two flow meters. And that was perfect, right? It would be able to, you can graph that out all day long, very easy for the engineer to get going. Very little context, it would generate the file. The problem is the opportunities of building that code on the engineering side. If you have that simple of a skid, the bottleneck is not in writing the code, right? It's very easy for an
Mhm.
engineer that's
Yeah.
experienced to create that layout regardless. But as you start to scale, if you have a very custom build piece of equipment on the chemical side, or even in discrete packaging, it becomes extremely unscalable and very difficult to create the scenario that will then accurately translate into PLC based code.
Mhm.
And to be honest with you, I'm experiencing. I wouldn't call it's not PTSD. What's the word? Like a flashback, like a deja vu
Deja vu.
of
Yeah.
of what these companies are promising and are hoping to achieve,
Mhm.
similar to Wonder Logics, right? And like I said, I had invested quite a bit of time. I went through like their training basically sequence, and I understood the vision and the premise. But again, there was a wall where the system was simply too complex to be built inside of their tool. And I'm seeing a similar type of, like I said, bottleneck hitting these companies that want to use AI on anything that is PLC related. I think that we're at a stage where anyone can go into Anthropic, as that's the
Mhm.
current, I would say, LLM of choice for many developers. Put all of the context in, whether that's ladder logic diagrams, functional specs, structured text, right? Whatever that may be, and get pretty good results without needing any external platform. But the question then becomes, as you get more and more context, and we see this on the software side as well, it becomes very difficult to generate deterministic responses, right? As the code base becomes so incredibly complex, it becomes more and more difficult to rely on AI to create the code necessary and changes necessary. So, what you're left with as the engineer is now you're spending more time basically truncating different pieces of code and pasting that in the context window to generate something that is reliable and repeatable. So, all that to say, and I know I wanted to keep this short, is I think that we will see an evolution of some of these companies. And I think there is a time and a place where they can come in handy. But I think we're still in the early stages. And I'm not sure that it scales in the way that some of these companies anticipated to scale. Thoughts, comments, confusion, concerns?
There was a lot there.
Yep.
There was a lot there, Vlad, including an entire middle aside. in which you were talking about Wonder Logic's a company that I haven't considered in 6 or 7 years at this
Yep.
point. But no, I I think it's interesting to go see and watch the tools as they move forward and progress. I am nearly always hesitant about those tools, having used a number of them and having seen some of the folks who have come out with tools like this, or having seen people in front of customers say we've created a tool that can absolutely go do this, and then it absolutely cannot go do it when it comes time to go do the project. And there's a lot of the manual. And I guess I have a couple of minds about it. One, most of the time, if you can get to the 80-ish% level, the 80-ish% level, maybe the 90-ish% level with a lot of these tools is very good, and it's a good starting space, and you'll save a bunch of time. But it's really hard to get to that 100% level. And beyond that, if you're just trying to go flip an old system, be it a PLC or be it a SCADA, MES, etc. system, you lose all of the abilities to go through and update the processes and go find additional savings for those processes, which many times can pay for or more than pay for the entire projects themselves. And I guess as an example, something that you may remember the story, Vlad. I haven't talked about it explicitly in a while, but I was going through and I was doing an ignition, SCADA, and MES upgrade solution. And as part of that, we were going and doing some machine HMIs. And one of those is for a furnace, right? And so you go and you go, I guess for me, we would go and have conversations with all of the operators. And I kind of I internally call it like a gripe list, right? Like, what part of the systems don't you like so we can attempt to go make it better? And the comment from them is basically every time I have to go start a new load in this box furnace, I have to press the same 14 buttons. And it takes me forever to press the same 14 buttons, and I press the same 14 buttons no matter what it is. Now, most of the time you're like, what are the chances that you actually have to press the same 14 buttons for every load across everything? Well, long story short, Vlad, they had to press the same 14 buttons because that's how the system was designed. And so we were able to go through, and after confirming that it's not going to make any substantial difference, and they are pressing the same buttons for everything that we're running in that furnace, we're able to go turn that 14 button series of pressing basically down into a single button press. And so significantly reducing it. And we were able to go from something like 10 loads in the box furnace over the course of a 10 or 12-hour shift to 11 loads in the box furnace over the course of a 10 or 12-hour shift, which provided significant. I mean, that's the ROI on the entire project right there, right? It was $1 million or several million
Were they
dollars.
that slow at pressing the buttons?
I think it was the fact that they had to go press, 140 plus buttons every shift. And yes, and I think some of it is right because you're saving those 10 or 15 minutes, where then the last thing we're doing at the end of the shift is we are starting the next one and we come in the following morning and the run is done, sort of thing, as opposed to we found 5 hours of savings or we found 2 hours of savings. We didn't find 2 hours of savings. What we did is we found enough time to get the next batch into the furnace and let that batch run overnight before we came back in the following morning.
Yeah, makes sense. All right, moving us through the HMI side, and let's bundle HMI maybe and SCADA together, right? So I've had similar conversations on HMI and just visuals where I'm to the point where I agree that AI can generate certain screens relatively well, depending on, of course, the skill of the individual prompting for those screens, but also the
Yep.
context given. So I think that we are at a stage where AI is simplifying the development of certain screens. I have not, and I've mentioned that I need to be trialing this out myself, but I do believe that there's now an opportunity, especially with Ignition 8.3, because you can manipulate the files and the underlying tag structure. You can now automate the creation of your screens for specific processes. So I think that there is an opportunity to create HMI screen much faster, which is a win on that specific ecosystem, because you cannot do this with other vendors that do not have either an MCP or an open
Mhm.
file structure. So I think that there's definitely advancements. And I'm not, to be honest with you, I've not seen companies basically showcase any of those solutions.
Mhm.
Perhaps at ICC, we'll see maybe integrators who are exhibiting, creating some of those demos on how they can simplify or accelerate some of those developments. But I do believe there to be an opportunity. But outside of that, again, an HMI, I think, and generally speaking, HMI technology hasn't changed in many, many years. So really,
Mhm.
you're just having different ways of deploying HMI solutions. I think there's some changes in thin clients versus thick clients as to how HMIs and SCADA are deployed. What kind of thoughts do you have when it relates to HMI and SCADA?
So for me, I think it's very interesting. We on the Kaplan side are certainly leveraging uh, AI solutions in order to go ahead and help build some of these screens. Having
Mhm.
said that, I have worked with various MCP servers in order to go ahead and deploy across a whole bunch of visualizations, right? Everything from web services through Ignition 8.3, through some of these various other solutions.
Mhm.
And it's really hard for it to get it exactly the same and exactly how you want, right?
Yeah.
So like someone could go vibe code a, this is what I want. You could get 90, 95% of the way there, but there's still the human element of coming in and making sure that everything works. And there's still all of the bindings and everything else that you're doing on the back end after we've made a physical screen. So not to say that it's not saving any amount of time, but going and figuring out how you can go through the process of standardizing that across volumes can be a little bit difficult. I think we will see folks who are enabled to make a whole slew of both very fantastic and some of the worst screens that we've ever seen in our entire life. And I think a lot of that is people who maybe perhaps don't understand like the high performance HMI handbook. For people who don't understand what everything looks like when you're actually operating these screens, the fact that some not insignificant portion of the population is colorblind, and so we have to have words as well as colors, and we really don't want that many colors, right? And so there is the learning lesson that we must go through in order to make everything look good and be usable and all of that. So I guess that's the long way around saying I think we're going to see people go deploy who are going to be able to go deploy some of these things faster. But for those of us who have spent years and decades in the ecosystem, I really think, similar to some other things that we've seen, it's going to be the first taste of, yes, we like this. Think about everything we can do with this. Now, hopefully, let's go call the professionals and make this a fully functioning system because now we've gotten a taste of it. It's like the similar concept of cobots, right? Like the concept that lots of people sell of cobots is go give an engineering intern a cobot. If you've given the engineering intern a cobot, they're going to go find a solution. And then everyone's going to be like, yes, we need robots. I think it's a very same thought and conversation across the line of let's go open some MCP servers. Let's go have people write some stuff in there. We'll see where it goes. Candidly, like especially with the Ignition 8.3 MCP server that we had several conversations with Travis and Kevin and Carl and Colby. Like I would be very worried to give almost anyone or almost any agent access to my live production Ignition solution because how many times have we seen that the solution decide that it just wants to, I don't know, like delete a database? And deleting databases are really bad, as a lot of our listeners will know. It certainly happened. Hopefully, it's
Mhm.
backed up before. Lots of times, it's not backed up before. Will AI learn to back up before it deletes databases? Probably not. So, I think that it will enable kind of a next generation of solutions. I think for some of us, it will enable the ability to go down the process of deploying faster and helping with some of those visualizations faster. But In my experience of using it in the last 6 months for those solutions, do I see that it's able to go ahead and replace a developer that knows what they're doing? No. Will it enable them to get better and hopefully allow us to go faster? I would hope so. I think that's where we're going to see some of the wins.
And it's an interesting thought, right? Like I've been also discussing with a few just like colleagues, I guess, the promise of training, all right? And I think that it seems that because AI can kind of do anything, no one is necessarily sharing specific things that should be the focus of the engineering teams, but also, to your point, because you can prompt AI to do anything within the ignition ecosystem, there's this kind of analysis paralysis where you don't want to let it in because it can do anything. But I see concrete examples where, let's say, I've been stuck in the past before, where, for example, you lay out a specific screen, it can do some of the final touches, right? It can
Mhm.
square everything very neatly, it can space everything out very neatly. And it seems that there is no maybe like frameworks on that side in our industry where you show up to the HMI screen and where things should be aligned, I can, with a naked eye, tell that things are just poorly implemented, right? And I'm hoping that AI can incorporate maybe some of those final touches at the very least. But again, I feel like there's not enough content, but also not enough guardrails in our industry to make that a reality. Um, Transitioning into MES, right? And I think that this is where this becomes very interesting because, of course, you and I have been having these conversations as part of different, not only trade shows, but also in the industry. But to the earlier comment, more and more data is being collected as a result of utilizing AI for that specific data. And so there is this general, I would say, statement that has been made. I'm not sure I entirely agree. I don't know what your thought is, but to an extent, AI could be writing various solutions at the MES layer, right? So instead of purchasing a SaaS made for manufacturing, you could, in theory, query your way or vibe code your way, depending on, I guess, how you want to word that, into a screen that presents some of the KPIs, that we had mentioned a little bit earlier, whether that's OEE, whether that's downtime, mean time to repair, mean time to failure, whatever else that may be. It could be also work order scheduling, right? Execution, so on and so forth. I guess I'll start on that front. I guess I continue to see more and more companies in the MES space. I continue to see more and more, I would say, AI enabled solutions as part of those companies and their offerings. I've not seen AI native companies in the MES space yet. I don't know if you have. And what I mean by that generally is, they have a pre-built MES solution, and of course, they've layered a chatbot and usually an MCP server or open up development to the AI. And we've had those conversations right as far back as Prove It of this year. I think there's interesting players in that space. I think there's more and more advancements being made. I am not sure that I'm sold on the premise that I would let somebody vibe code my MES or again MOM. You can use all sorts of different acronyms. You can throw in limbs in there as well, QMS, so on and so forth. I'm not sure I would let anyone vibe code that application from scratch. I would still, at least at this stage, prefer to see an implementation of that software and then perhaps layered with some AI analytics tools on top of. What are your thoughts on that front, Dave?
I I think that's a lot to unpack, Vlad. Right. So I
Yes.
think that I don't see or predict that we're going to have lots of people who are just straight vibe coding a complete MES solution. What I do anticipate is we are going to be more structured and more intentional on how we are building our databases and our data lakes. And then once we have that clean contextualized data, we're going to allow our power users and other people to go ahead and query it with our AI tools. And that could be a Snowflake. That could, in theory, be a Claude with an MCP server. But once we've gone through the process of clarifying that data, I think we are going to have a smaller number of important KPIs. Then we're going to let people go ahead and query those KPIs and around those KPIs without having to build monolithic MES solutions. I know I have certainly worked with groups, end users who have spent years and years going and millions of dollars going and building every single particular thing that they could possibly need for an MES and going and building out reports and trending and all of that. I think that maybe not today and certainly not in every solution, we are to the point of you shouldn't pay someone to go build 100 or 1,000 or 10 reports. We should be able to go ahead and know what those endpoints of the data are and turn them into projects and build skills and be able to have standardized solutions and reports coming out that we can go ahead and say we want to go run once a day. We want to go run once a week. I should be able to go query it, today, go run me this report. I should be able to go ask about that report. That's the direction that I see us moving, as opposed to Dave and Vlad are just vibe coding each their own MES solution and hoping that localhost 8000 doesn't go down.
Yeah, and like I said, I'm just maybe repeating some of the conversations that I've been having, and I think that there is maybe this general consensus among certain groups, right? I'm not saying that this is
Mhm.
true for everyone, but it is now easier than ever to just build software internally
Mhm.
as opposed to using an off-the-shelf solution. I think, my general comment is that I've been having these conversations more so now than before, and I
Yep.
still believe that it is a very underestimated undertaking, but also not just to build, right, but also to deploy and maintain such a solution. And I think that we all are, I would want to say, very ambitious in believing that AI can do all of these amazing things, but I think we still underestimate the requirements of manufacturing in a broader sense, and not only, like I said, in what it takes to build that specific application, but also to make sure that it can still be usable, if not a single decade, or at least a single decade, but if not
Yeah.
multiple decades into the future. And I think it is a very big trap perhaps for younger players in our space. But again, I remain curiously positive. I'm very interested in seeing if there will be more companies. I believe that there will be more rounds raised from VCs in the manufacturing space, and I would be not surprised to see that there's going to be more and more solutions, again, in the MES layer in manufacturing, built probably by software engineers that, again, have not seen some of the challenges in manufacturing. But
Mhm.
I'm curious to see where it goes, and hopefully, as they say, a rising tide lifts all boats. There will be, again, like capital spent, which then will push
Mhm.
other vendors in the MES space to quote unquote do better than what we currently have.
Yeah, I guess if I can finish that, or if I can go
Mhm.
add on to that, in the conversations we're having and the predictions that we're having, the value is the data and is very much the data that the organization has and the contextualized versions of that data, be it UNS or ISA 95 or really any way that we want to go down the process of having standardized, contextualized, clean data. There will be lots of AI solutions that come and go, right? Like an organization can get in and out of 10 different MES solutions in the next decade if that's what they want to go to. They can go vibe code 100 different MES solutions over the next decade for a relatively insignificant number of dollars comparative to all of the other work that we have done. Compared to all of the other work that we've done in the past on some of these MES solutions. The real value to those organizations is the data And what they need to do is make sure that they have and own the data and to spend the time there. And then they can drag and replace any sort of visualization tool, really any sort of like SCADA, MES, AI style data tools, etc. On up. But you have to have that data foundation in order to be able to go ahead and add and move and replace things. And so when we talk to organizations about AI, it's very much on the AI enablement and how do you go set yourself up for success, not just right now if you're somehow ready to do it, but very much over the course of the next 2, 3, 5, 10 years as solutions get better. And really, over the course of the last 6 months ago, I could not have predicted where AI would be today and how we use AI and all of the MCP servers and all of the different ways and tools that we see people rolling things out. I certainly can't predict 6 months from now, and I'm not even going to wager a guess for 3 to 5 years from now. So we need to lay the foundational ability to be successful into the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Dave, we obviously have a lot more topics to cover. I know that we're way over time, so I do want to close off the conversation and make sure we give some of our audience some of their time back. We've talked a lot about many different things, right? We've talked about Automate, we've talked about our plans for ICC, we've talked about different technologies. We went quite deep as to our experiences at Automate. If anyone has any questions for myself or Dave, don't hesitate to reach out. You can find us very easily on LinkedIn. We also publish on YouTube. We publish on every, as far as I'm concerned, on every notable podcast platform. So if you're listening to this in podcast form, there should be footnotes where you can find us and get in touch with us as well. We have the next couple of conversations planned out, after which we do have a few themes that we do want to run in a similar fashion than we've done in the past. If you would like to discuss some of those conversations, if you have some thoughts or maybe interesting topics on what we've talked about on this episode before or going into the future, once again, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Dave, any final thoughts and or comments on your side?
Yeah, everyone, thank you for hanging out with us today. Very much looking forward to seeing you guys at ICC and into the future in person. Looking forward to the next couple of conversations we have, the themes that we've got going, and everything else that we've got going on for the rest of the year, which should be super exciting. Vlad, this is, in fact, we normally shoot for 75 minutes, so this is the longest episode we've done in a while. I hope our listeners enjoyed it. We made it through at least 65% of our very aggressive bullet points of the show notes, of which we almost never make it all the way through. Until next week, we will see everyone soon.